You are watching Auth Masterclass, and in this video we are going to discuss about session based login. So in previous video we have completed token based login and we discussed in detail about each and every aspect of doing token based authentication. So be it the access token, be it generating refresh token, and all the related security aspects around it. Now we will go up a notch and we are going to discuss another way of doing user login that is based on session. So previously we used to generate token. Now we are going to rely on server sessions to identify the logged in user, right? So this is another way of doing authentication and this is what we are going to see. Now what I have done, see, previously we completed user registration flow, right? And on top of that we started building the token based authentication framework, right? Now what I have done, I have reverted back the code to the place where we completed the user registration, okay, so that we can create another branch and there we will see session based authentication. Okay, that doesn't mean I have deleted anything, everything is git controlled, right? So when I'll be sharing you the code, you will find each and every code, okay. But now what I have done, I have reverted it to the state where we finished user registration, okay. And what I have done in the env, this mongo URI, it was auth, so I changed it to auth underscore session, okay. So it will create one more database instance and there we will start working, because in the previous database instance we had a lot of information, right? Token secret and refresh token related information. So I decided not to delete but instead create another database instance, right? And what I have done, I have added this protected route. So if you remember, we added this in our login, okay. So this is the route that we are going to play, okay, and this is supposed to be a protected route and we are going to add authentication and we will see whether we are able to protect this particular route or not, okay. So this is going to be our playground API, okay. So this is where we will do all our experiment, right? So as always the server is running, right? And what we will do, first I want to start with sessions, okay. So what exactly is a session, okay? So you can say session is a global variable, okay, that is available all across the app, okay, all across our Node.js application. So if I have to access the session, all I have to do is request.session and I'll have the session information, right? Now every time a user comes into our API, okay, they will have a session information, okay. So for example, you are accessing the API, okay, so you session variable for you will be created, okay. Now if I go into the system, another session variable will be created for me, right? Now how the session information will be identified, okay. So for this what we will do, so say for example there is a get CSRF token, right? So I'll send a request. Now if you go to cookies, okay, there is a particular cookie called as connect.sid, okay. So what, and this cookie is HTTP only cookie, right? So that means server side code cannot read this, okay, and only client can set, read and delete this cookie information, right? Now if you remember the CSRF token, we are storing it in the session, right? Now how it will be identified which session belongs to which user, right? That is by this connect.sid. So when you go to the system, you will have a session and in turn you will get a session ID like this connect.sid, and if I go, I'll also get a connect.sid. Now based on what I am sending, okay, the session information from the application memory will be retrieved and whatever session information that we have stored, that will be fetched, okay. So say for example we have stored a CSRF token in the session, right? So when you go to the system, a different CSRF token is stored for you, and when I go to the system, a different CSRF token is stored in the system, right? Now when I'm sending the CSRF token, I have to send this cookie information, right? Then based on this cookie information, the server CSRF token will be fetched and it will be compared, right? That's how session works, okay. Now one demerit with session is, say for example you have this session ID, right? Then for some reason server restarts, right? So the session information is lost, of course, right? Because this is something that is sitting on your app server on the Express app, right? So if app restarts, okay, the session information is obviously lost, right? So if you send this one, of course it will say not found, right? And it will throw all validation errors, right? The same thing can happen when there is a load balancer and multiple app servers, okay. So what will happen, there are multiple app servers like 3 or 4, that's how it usually works in production, okay. Production usually handles a lot of load. Okay, and to manage that, there is a load balancer, and as the name suggests, it will balance load between different servers. Okay, and each of these server has its own CPU and memory, and our application runs on this. Okay, now suppose you go to a login, or say for example, let us take the example of our CSRF. Okay, now what you did, you asked for a CSRF token. Okay, and say for example, the load balancer redirect you to the app 1. Okay, the app server 1, and there session information was created. The session CSRF token was stored in the session, and you got this connect.sid. Okay, now next time when you are sending this CSRF token, when you are trying to submit a form or for whatever purpose, okay, you asked for this CSRF token, you have to send it back, right? So that the form submission will happen properly, right? And in that scenario, and what happened, the load balancer at this time, it redirect you to say app number 3 or a different app server. Okay, now in that app server you don't have the session information, right? So definitely what will happen, it will say this is this CSRF token is not valid, right? So this is an interesting problem, and we solve it through a concept called as session stickiness. That is also going to be subject matter of this course, okay, this video. So we are going to see that, right? So now let us start implementing some code. Okay, so now currently we have connect.sid, and we are using it for two purposes. Okay, get CSRF token and get captcha, right? So captcha is stored in session, image will be sent, right? You have to read the image and you have to send this image, and along with this cookie ID, right? And based on this cookie ID on the server, the stored text will be compared to what you are sending. Okay, great. So we have this information in place, and with that, let us start. Okay, now if we go to index, okay, here you will see we are using session, right? So what is this session being used for? This is the session for the CSRF and the captcha, right? Now here, what is the expiry for this cookie? 3 minutes, right? And for my login session, I could have used this session. Only problem is this expiry, right? I want my login session to be valid for a day. Okay, of course it might change based on your business need, right? But ideally it should be valid for a day, right? So for this purpose, what I want to do, I want to clone this. Okay, and here I want to add some more time. Okay, so how can I add more time to this? Of course, so this parameter will be taken in milliseconds, right? So I'll say 1000, okay, star seconds, okay, star minutes, and star hours. Okay, so what does this mean? This means for 24 hours this session is valid. Okay, so let me update the comment. Okay, so I will say 1 day or 24 hours. Okay, see, now there are two problems. Okay, so this session, we are creating two sessions, right? But how are these two sessions different from each other in terms of name, right? So both of them are named as connect.sid, right? So now we should be able to distinguish this, right? So what we can do, we can pass a name to this. Okay, so name, okay, and let us name it something. Okay, so this is just a general purpose server session, right? So I want to call it as server.sid. Okay, and here this is going to be used for login, right? So I want to call it as name and say login.sid. Okay, great. Now coming to the secret. Okay, for both the session, I don't want to use the same secret. Okay, I want to change the secret for the login session. Okay, so for this, what I will do, I'll go to env, and if you see here, I already have a session underscore secret. Okay, in the same line, what I have done, I have created another secret and called it as session secret login, right? So this I will copy and I will add it here. Okay, so both of them have different name and they are created with a different secret. Okay, great. Now if you see here, both the session, okay, they are lying in our index.js file, right? And this is not how I want to structure my code. Okay, so I'll come to middleware, I'll add a new file and I will add a middleware and I will call it as create session.middleware.js. Okay, and here what I will do, I will bring these two. Okay, I will cut, okay, and I will paste it here. And what I will do, I will say export const, I will say server session equals to, and I don't have to do the app.use. Okay, and I will remove this bracket and I will correct the spelling. Okay, so what this is doing, server session equals to session and all the parameter that we have added previously, right? And the same thing I can do here. So I will say export const, I will say login session equals to, and I will delete the brackets. Okay, right? Now what else I need? I need this session. Okay, so this session I can get it from Express session, right? So this is not being used here, so I can cut it from here. Okay, and I will add it here, right? Great. What else I need? I need the .env. I need the .env, right? So I will come here and add .env.config. Okay, why? Because we are reading the process.env, right? So we need the .env configuration here, right? So now what we have done, the session creation logic, we have extracted it into a middleware, right? And wherever we need this, we are going to use it. Okay, great. So with this, our logic to set up the session is completed. Okay, so we have given a different name, okay, and different age, okay, and they work on different secret. Okay, great, right? Now we will come to service. Okay, and here I will create a new file and I will call it as login.service.js. okay, and here we are going to write both the login and logout logic. Okay, so here I will say export const and I will say login equals to async. It will take the request and response object, request response, and it will be an arrow function, right? Now in the body we will get the username and password, right? So I will say const username and password equals to request.body, right? Then first thing what we have to do, we have to check if the username exists in the system, right? So I will say const user equals to this user schema dot find one. Okay, and how it will find? It will find by the user name, right? And here what I have to do, I have to await this, right? Then if, okay, if this is not the case, that means if the user doesn't exist, okay, what we will do, return res.status of 401. Okay, and I will say JSON and message, and we will say invalid credentials, right? Perfect. Then if the user is valid, what we have to do, we have to do the password validation, right? So I will say const is password valid, okay, equals to bcrypt, and I will import bcrypt first, right? So I will say import bcrypt from bcrypt, right? So I will say bcrypt, okay, dot compare. Okay, compare what? Compare the password that is being sent in the body versus the password that is stored in the database. Now what we will do, we will do the validation. If is not password valid, okay, what we will do, we will say return res.status, okay, 401 and JSON. And what I will do, let me copy this one, right? Of course we are not going to send any specific message, okay, same message everywhere we will send invalid credential. Okay, now if this is the case, okay, now what we will do, we will set the session. Okay, and with what value we will set? Remember when we were doing token based login, we used to set the payload, right? And that payload will go as a signed JWT token to the front end, and the front end will give it back. We will do the decode and we will get the payload back, right? Something similar we will do here. Instead of that payload, the value, we'll store it in the session, and on behalf of the session, a cookie information will go. When the cookie information will come back in the request, we will get the cookie, we will get the session from that cookie identifier, and we will get the value back, right? So here what I will say, request dot session dot, I will say user ID. Okay, and what value I can add? I can add user dot underscore ID, right? So when we are sending the payload, we are sending user ID and username, right? Similarly, this same thing we are doing here, but instead of creating a payload, we are just setting it in the session, right? So next time when we are doing the validation, we will receive it back from the session, right? So I will say request dot session dot username equals to user dot username, right? And what I will say, res dot status, okay, status of 204, okay, and I'll pass an empty JSON, right? Because as such I don't have anything to return, right? What will be returned? the cookie information will be returned, right? That will automatically happen, right? So I will save this one. Then I'll come to auth route. Okay, and here I will say router.post, okay, /login, and what I have to do, I have to give the login. Okay, and if you see here also we are getting some error, right? So what is this error saying? It is saying this schema, right? So I will add .js, right? So this is working. Now coming to the auth routes, right? So here if you see, we are setting login, and inside this login, okay, what we are doing, we are accessing session information, right? And this session information, in order to make it available inside this scope, okay, what we have to do, we have to pass the session creation middleware, right? This one, server.session, and we have login.session, right? So if you see here, we are setting session, right? But to which session we are setting, we don't know that, right? Because we have two sessions. One is the server session, one is the login session, right? So to which session we are setting inside this login? Who will define that? This middleware define that. Okay, so I'll say login session, right? So now when I pass this login session, this login, okay, this login function or the service layer will have access to the request.session. Which session? The login session. Okay, so this is mandatory step. Okay, so login, right? Great. So now I'll come to postman. Okay, I'll come to login. Okay, and here admin and password, we are sending username and password, right? Now for now temporarily you can ignore the OTP, right? I am not deleting this because I have to share the postman collection with you, right, after the series ends, right? So I'm not deleting this, right? But anyways, we are not reading this, right? So if you see here, the login service, what we are reading, username and password, right? So it's safe to keep it the OTP here, right? So I'm not deleting this, but for now just ignore this part, right? So username and password we are sending. So let me send it, right? And if you see here, what happened, we get the login.sid, right? So this is the important here. So we are able to get the cookie back, and based on this cookie, okay, the server stored session information will be retrieved. Okay, so what is the next step? Now let us go to protected route, and if I send it, of course this is working, right? And only when I'm logged in it should work, right? So let us add the validation. Okay, so here I'll open the VS Code back, and in middleware I'll add a new file. Okay, and I will call it as validate login.middleware.js. Okay, and here what I will do, export const validate login equals to, okay, async equals to, okay, request, okay, response and next. Okay, so this will be a arrow function, right? So what actually we have to do when doing the validation? So in login service we are setting the user ID, right? Now all we have to do is to see if this user ID exists or not, right? If this exists, then it's a valid session. If this doesn't exist, then it's not a valid session, right? It's not a valid login, right? So what I will do, if, okay, not of request.session.user ID, okay, what we will do, we will say return, okay, I will say res.status of 401 unauthorized, and I will say JSON, and I will pass a message as, you can give any error message, right? So for now I'm just saying unauthorized. Okay, right? And if this is not the case, what I have to, I just have to call the next method, right? Perfect. So now what will happen, let me do some console log here. Okay, so I'll say console.log request.session.user ID, or instead let me do the user name, right? Because user ID is the MongoDB user ID, right? That will be difficult for us to read. So I'll say username. Okay, and if you want, you can do validation for both user ID or username, both should exist, and both of them should exist, right? But for my purpose I'm just doing one validation. Okay, and even this line is also maybe optional, right? Based on what implementation you are doing, it depends on that, right? But minimum you have to send one identification for the user, right? Great. So let us do the username login. Okay, now what we will do, we'll come to protected route. Okay, and here what we will do, we will say this validate login, right? We'll call the validate login function. And what else we have to do? So if you remember the auth route, okay, this login information Okay, this is setting the session, right? And in order to do that, we are passing the login session, right? Now this protected route is supposed to read this information, right? So in order to read this, we also have to send this session information, right? Then only it will be able to read it. Okay, and why it is complaining? I think this .js middleware is extension is missing, right? And what else? Session login is not defined. Okay, so what we will do, I'll say I'll type it again. Okay, login session. Okay, so it will import it, right? So let us see. Now this server is running successfully. Okay, so any function, okay, that is using session, before that this login session, it has to be called. Okay, it has to be passed as part of this middleware, right? Great. Now what we will do, I will come to Postman, I'll do a login. Okay, so we are getting this cookie, right? Now I'll come to protected route and I will send a message. Okay, and then I'll come to VS Code. Okay, and if you see, this log is coming. Okay, this is coming as admin. Okay, from where this is coming? This is coming from this request.session.user ID, right? So since we added it here, we are able to read it, right? Where we are able to read it? In the validate login, right? And let me do this. Okay, and just so that it won't throw any exception. Okay, now I'll show you the problem. Okay, so now what has happened? Server has restarted, right? Now if I go and send the request, okay, what it is saying? Unauthorized. Okay, and it is coming as undefined. Why? Because server restarted, right? So this login information that we have on the front end, this no longer exists on the back end, right? That's why we are getting the unauthorized error, right? So now if I do a login, okay, and if I come to the protected route, now it will work. Okay, right? So once we do a restart or it goes to different app server through load balancer, of course it will fail, right? Okay, now we will fix that. Okay, in some time we will fix it. Okay, but before that, let us do logout flow. Okay, so I will say export, okay, const, I will say logout equals to, okay, I will say async, I will say request, okay, response, and here what I have to do, I have to destroy the session, right? So for this, what I will do, request dot session dot destroy, right? And this is the function. Okay, and what I will do, response dot, I will say clear cookie. Okay, which cookie? Login dot sid. Okay, and what I will do, res dot status of 204, no content, right? Okay, great. Now we have the logout, right? Where we are going to use it? We are going to use it in another route method, right? So route.post, I will say logout. Okay, and what else I have to do? I have to pass the login session. Why? Because we are destroying the session, right? And unless we don't pass this login session middleware, it doesn't know which session to destroy, right? So we'll pass it, and we'll also pass the logout, the service method, right? Great. So now we have logout in place. Let us test the flow once. So I'll do a login. Okay, I will go to protected route and send a request. Then we'll do a logout, and this server is stuck, right? So let us see what is going on. And here I think I should add the JSON function. Okay, so let us try this. Okay, so we will come to login. Okay, I'll come to protected route and I'll come to logout. Okay, so now if you see, no content, right? Now what will happen if I go to protected route? What will happen? See, unauthorized, right? Now if I do login again, and now if I go to protected route, it will work. If I do logout, okay, and now if I come to protected route, failed, right? So login, logout, and the protected route both are working as expected. Okay, now two more things we will do. We'll come to auth route, and if you see here, generate captcha, okay, generate CSRF token, okay, and this validate CSRF token, validate captcha. What they are doing here? They are reading the session information here as well, right? Which session information they are reading? So if we go to the session middleware, they are reading the server session, right? Not this login session. This is separate for login. This is separate for other purpose like the captcha and CSRF, right? So what I will do here, I will attach the session creation process just like I did here, right? So what I will do, I will say server session. Okay, and same thing I will do here also, server session, and here also I'll do the server session. Okay, great. So we are able to attach the session, we are able to validate it, right? Great. Now coming to the problem. Okay, so now if I go to protected route, it won't work. Okay, because this server restarted in between, right? So let us fix that one. Okay, so what we will do, we will use a npm package called as connect-mongo. Okay, so what connect-mongo will do, it will store the session information in MongoDB. Okay, so next time when your app server starts, it will read the information back from the MongoDB. Okay, it will not be an empty slate. Okay, it will read it back from the MongoDB, and if anything exists, okay, it will use that. If doesn't exist, that's fine, right? So for this, what we will do, we'll install a package. Okay, so I'll say npm install, it is connect-mongo. Okay, great. Now where we have to write the logic, in create session logic. Okay, so here what I will do, I will say import. Okay, I will say mongo store, and I'll import it from connect-mongo. Okay, then I will come here and there is a property called as store. Of course, if you want, you can store it in Redis or Memcache, right? But I'm going to store it here in the MongoDB. Okay, so I'm going to say mongo store dot, I will say create. Okay, and this will take one parameter, where, on which MongoDB. Okay, so how it will identify, based on the Mongo URI. Okay, so we already have a Mongo URI, right? So we are going to store it there. So it will take the function, it will take the object, configuration object, and it will store the Mongo URI. Okay, and from where we will get the Mongo URI? So if we go to index here, what we are doing, we are connecting to this Mongo URI, right? So I will copy it and paste it here, right? Great. Now since we have two sessions and each of them are named different, what we have to do, also we have to store it in two different collection, right? If we had only one session, of course we don't have to pass any information, it will store it as a default collection. But since we have two different sessions, okay, we are going to pass a collection name, and based on this session, it will store that it in that particular collection. Okay, so what we will do, we will say collection name. Okay, and what name we can give, we can give, say for example, this is the server session, right? So I can say server session. Okay, and what I will do, I will copy this line. Okay, and what I will do, I will add it here, and I will just change this one to login session, right? And what is missing, one comma is missing here, that's why it is throwing this error, right? So now what we will do, our server is running as usual, right? And what we have done, our session will be stored in the MongoDB, right? So let me go to Postman. Okay, and do a login. Okay, now I have done a login. Okay, I will come to MongoDB and I will do a refresh. Okay, so if you see here, the login session and server session, two new collection have come up, right? So I'll come to this login session, and if you see, there is an ID and there are some information about the session, right? Perfect. So if I scroll it here, you will find all the details. Okay, now this login session is stored. Now we will try to simulate the previous scenario, right? So what we will do, we will come here and I will just do a Control S, so that what will happen, this server will be restarted. Okay, now if I come to protected route, earlier it was not working, right? So if you remember, it was throwing unauthorized error. Now if I send a request, see, this is working, right? I am able to read the information. Okay, and I can show you again by doing a restart. Okay, I'll do this restart. Okay, and I'll come to protected route and it will work. Okay, when this will actually stop working, when I do logout. Okay, I do a logout and it will not work anymore, right? Now what will happen to this session in the database? I'll do a refresh. Okay, and it has been updated with some different information, right? So now what has happened, I'm not able to access it. Okay, when I'll be able to access it, when I do login, right? And then I'll be able to access it, the protected route, and I can do logout. And now this is all coming from the MongoDB, right? So even if your server restarts, or because of the load balancer, if your request goes to different server, it will still behave properly, right? Now coming to other examples, right? So say for example, you want to do CAPTCHA validation. you want to do OTP validation, right? What you have to use? request.session.userid, right? Earlier we were getting it back from the payload and we were attaching it in the request, like request.userid equals to our user ID, and that particular user ID we used to read for all further validation or doing anything in the service layer, right? Now all you have to do is, instead of reading it from request.user, from where you have to read? You have to read it from request.session. Okay, everything else will remain the same, right? There is no difference in other implementation, okay, like OTP implementation or your role-based access control, right? Of course we'll see that later, but the only difference on how you read the user, okay, that is the only difference between implementation wise, okay, between the login using a token versus a session, right? Of course architecture wise they are very different, but when you are going to read the user information for your purpose, there will be only two difference: request.user versus request.session. Okay, everything else will remain the same, right? So this is all about doing login by using the Express section. Okay, and we have seen how we can leverage the connect-mongo and store the session information in MongoDB. Okay, great. So this is all for this video. I really hope that you enjoyed this video, you learned something new. If you like this video, give this video a thumbs up. Okay, subscribe to the channel, because this is the kind of content that I bring on this channel on a regular basis, and I'll see you in the next video.